Hey guys, welcome back to Critical African Thinkers. As you know, this is the place where we examine everything under the microscope of logic to ascertain what is most factual and logically consistent. So, welcome to another show where we cover the ongoing onslaught in Gaza, the ongoing genocide that Israel is currently carrying out in Gaza, and sort of the justifications that many Israelis give for the atrocities that they are carrying out. And most recently, Israeli historian Benny Morris, in so many words, applauded Israel's ethnic cleansing. He made a case for ethnic cleansing, saying it's not a war crime. And this happened in a conversation or a debate that I had with Mehdi Hassan. But aside from that, we're also going to be talking about how many of the European allies of Israel are beginning to be much more critical and taking steps against Israel, including boycotting it, divesting away from Israel, and even going as far as sanctioning Israel. And lastly, we're going to be talking about how one country always seems to be at the wrong side of history in terms of genocide, and that's the country of Germany, who are wholeheartedly in support of Israel. They're giving Israel the weapons that they need to carry out this genocide in Gaza. One would think that, given Germany's solid history when it comes to genocide, that they would be wiser. They would recognize the pattern and they should be able to take steps against it. But no, they don't do any of that. They support Israel, and it's not a good look for them. It's a bad look for them. So we'll just go straight into the conversation with Benny Morris and Mehdi Hassan before we talk the other parts of the conversation. So let's go.
Ethnic cleansing is not regarded as a war crime by any.
So you're fine with it?
It's not a matter of fine. It's not a happy
I'm trying to
event.
understand.
We're not. I prefer ethnic cleansing of the other to being massacred my own people. Yes, sure.
Even if that involves innocent people being driven from their homes and not allowed to come back?
Yes. If you're under.
How does that fit with
if
the
you
Zionists
are-
wanted to
if
share the
you-
land?
Because of course the Zionists wanted. No, you're mixing up the times, the chronology. The Zionists were willing to share the land. The Arabs said no. The Arabs attacked them. And from that point on, the Jews, to defend themselves properly, they would have to drive out Arabs from certain areas from which the Arabs were attacking the Jewish.
So it was a pragmatic thing in the heat of war.
It wasn't ideological, it was pragmatic.
Even though you yourself say that transfer was inevitable and inbuilt into Zionism. Your words.
So let's just break down what just happened in this conversation. First of all, Benny Morris stated that ethnic cleansing is not a war crime. So essentially saying, it's not that bad. It's not as bad as you're making it out to be. And then he goes on to say, well, I prefer that my group ethnically cleanse another group when we are fighting for the same territory rather than being murdered. Now, logically, it makes sense to an extent. That is, if your group had any claim to that land. If both groups had equal claims to the land and there is a conflict for control and nobody wants to budge, then it is perfectly reasonable for you to want to guarantee the safety and the survival of your group. But that's not what happened. Benny Morris talked about the Israelis and the Jews wanting to share their land. It wasn't their land to share to begin with. It wasn't the Zionists' land to share to begin with. And it makes absolutely no sense. Why you would think that you are being generous enough to offer to share someone else's land? Now, that's not to say that there were no Jews in Palestine. There've always been Jews in that land. I mean, there was a Jewish kingdom there thousands of years ago. So there've always been Jewish presence in that land. But as at the time of the formation of the State of Israel in 1948, Jews were a significant they were a minority, not even they were a minority in that land. They were like 7 to 10% of the land, and they expect to share the land. The funny thing is that it's not even the Palestinian Jews who were calling for this. It was the foreigners, the immigrants, the Jews from Europe, the European Jews, the Zionists. They were the ones who wanted to come to Palestine and tell the people who are currently domiciled in the land how to share the land, how to use the land, what to make of the land. It makes no sense. Nobody is going to agree to something like that. I don't care how generous the partition plan was to the Palestinians. And of course, it wasn't generous to the Palestinians because about 55% of the land went to the Jews, to Israelis, while they were a minority. So even if it was 10% that went to the Jews, you wanted to create an ethno state, it wasn't your land to share to begin with. Now, the last point that Mehdi Hassan made, which just absolutely captures the kind of brain rot that Benny Morris is going through. In his book, I think Righteous Victim, he states that it was inevitable, ethnic cleansing was inevitable. Israel was ultimately going to do ethnic cleansing because it wants a what? Jewish supremacy state. There is no way you're going to create an ethno-nationalist state on a land that is populated by diverse people without committing such atrocities as ethnic cleansing or genocide. So it's inbuilt, the very idea that you want to create a state specifically for a people on a land that you have multiple people is in itself. What does it tell you? What is Zionism? Creation of a state for Jewish people, not on barren land, not on an empty land, but on a land that has other people in it. So it was inbuilt. The ideology, the desire to displace, to remove people, it was inbuilt into Zionism itself. So this is not, it wasn't an existential threat for Israel. Israel was not reacting to any pragmatic thing. This was what they were going to do ultimately. This is what they needed to do to make sure that they have a Jewish majority. So when you look at it and you say what Hamas did on October 7th, Hamas started this war. Of course, what Hamas did on October 7th was a terrible thing. But this is a carryover from the 1947 civil war, which essentially never ended because many of the issues remain unresolved. People who were kicked from their homes, people who still have the keys to their grandfathers' homes in Israel, not being allowed to return. But a Jew from New York, from Europe, from some other parts of the world can literally go to Israel and be a citizen, while someone who is born, whose grandparents were born on that land cannot have a similar right, cannot have similar rights. So what are you talking about? What are you talking about? It makes absolutely no sense. But this is the kind of twisted logic that Israelis have convinced themselves. They've convinced themselves into thinking that they are the good ones, they're the right ones, they're doing the correct thing, they're doing the right thing. I don't know whether they don't understand history or they're just deliberately ignoring it. I mean, this man is an historian. He's a historian. And he's making statements like this. This is a genocidal statement. And this is not something that's being said by only lay people like him. These are things that have been said by members of the Israeli government, by Netanyahu himself, the president of Israel, by war ministers, by cabinet members. And they are backing up this genocidal rhetoric with action, considering the number of people that have been killed in Gaza so far, considering the starvation and the blockade that is going on in Gaza right now. When is the world going to wake up to all this? Now, the only redeeming value to this is that there are many Jews who are against what Israel is doing, and there are many Israelis themselves who are against what Israel is doing. And we're going to be covering one of such Israelis, right, who is an Israeli scholar. And he essentially just exposed the Israeli mentality, how they've brainwashed themselves into thinking that they're not committing atrocities in Gaza. But the part I'm going to focus on in a conversation he had with another American podcaster is the part where what does it mean for the European states to now recognize the Palestinian state? Is it just a symbolic thing? Does it change the material conditions of Palestinians on the ground? And then the role of countries like Germany, who should be wiser, who are essentially bankrolling a genocide in another part of the world. So those are the other things that I'm going to cover. So let's just get into it as well.
Just this past week, again, we're recording this on July 29th, France announced that it would be the first of the G7 countries to recognize a Palestinian state. Now, that sounds nice and it looks nice in a headline, but what does that actually mean in terms of political and economic moves for the good of Palestinians? What's your take on that?
It means very little for the good of Palestinians, but it means something for Macron, the president of France, because at the same day when he made this declaration, a group of lawyers and civil society organizations filed a complaint against Macron at the International Court of Justice, at the ICC in The Hague, against Macron for complicity with genocide. So I don't know if the ICC will take up this um, and actually press charges against Macron, because, of course, they could also argue that there are even worse Western leaders that are worthy of that, which is not a good legal defense. You know, some other people are bad out there is not a good legal defense, but politically it does give Macron some protection from the court. But nevertheless, I think he's worried for good reason.
So essentially, what this Israeli scholar is saying, France's decision to recognize a Palestinian state is mostly for the optics of France themselves. Is mostly for the optics of state. The first thing you need to do is to stop supporting Israel, to stop sending weapons to Israel, to stop sending aid in whatever form to Israel, to put pressure on Israel to end the campaign. I mean, people are still. What does it matter that you have a Palestinian state and Israel is still slaughtering people? I mean, Lebanon is an independent state, and Israel still attacks it and still kills people in Lebanon, right? Syria is an independent state. Israel still kills people in Syria. Iran is an independent state. Israel still kills people in Iran, still kills people in Yemen. So is that going to change anything, recognizing the Palestinian state at this point, where Israel can still just go in and murder people, can bomb them? What does that change? If you're still giving him the means to be able to carry out a genocide, then it doesn't change anything materially. This is just you're just doing some symbolic things to make it seem as if you care about international law. You don't actually care about international law. You don't actually care about whatever is going on with the Palestinians. You just care about yourself.
Because it's one thing to say that he supports human rights or international law, while at the same time selling weapons to Israel, allowing Israeli war criminals to move through France. I remind you that when Netanyahu, who is a wanted war criminal, came to the United States, to Washington, to meet with Trump, he flew over French airspace. And France did not block the airspace to Netanyahu's plane. So there are a lot of reasons. I think Macron is now just saying, okay, let me recognize the state of Palestine in order to divert the attention and the critique from myself. And I hope it won't work, because I think it's more important that we really focus on what's important: international law, human beings, and their basic rights, and not about states or symbolic declarations.
And this is the problem I have with the West and many of these Western governments and Western countries, right? They make a big deal out of human rights. They make a big deal out of respect for international law, but they only apply it selectively and when it is convenient for them. When it is not convenient for them, they are perfectly fine with ignoring it. I mean, Israel, the US, NATO, and many of the European allies have been flaunting international law for months now. Netanyahu is a war criminal wanted by international bodies, but none of them have stepped up to say, we're going to arrest this guy. I mean, he's going around to many of these European countries, and none of them are going to arrest him. Just like this Israeli scholar said, Netanyahu flew over France's airspace. France is bound by international law to actually arrest this war criminal. But what do they do instead? Nothing. What do? They support him. They keep selling him weapons. So just miss me with that hypocritical nonsense when it comes to the West being a beacon of democracy and international law. No, it's not. It's hypocritical. It is selective. It's only when it benefits them, that's when they are going to apply international law. And this conflict is currently showing and exposing the double standards and the hypocrisy of the West. I mean, look at what happened with Iran and Israel. Israel has nuclear weapons. It will not declare them, but Israel thinks it has the right to prevent Iran, an independent state, from having nuclear weapons. Israel is as much an existential threat to Iran as Iran is an existential threat to Israel. So why is it allowed that Israel has nuclear weapons but Iran cannot? And then a state, the US, which is not even in that conflict, joined the conflict to bomb Iran for no reason. That's an act of war. That's an act of aggression. Imagine if Iran had bombed the US city. Imagine if that had happened. So why are some people able to do, why are some countries able to flout international law and other countries are expected to be bound by it to keep international law? What's good for one country should be good for other countries as well. But we know that's not what happens in reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to ask you then how that relates to BDS, which, if folks are unaware, it stands for Boycott, Divest, Sanctions Against Israel. How does that then? I mean, does that mean that that France's next step would be to divest, to boycott? I mean, the U.S. does a lot of work leveraging unilateral sanctions against many countries in the world. Could France or another nation, for instance, or countries in BRICS and things like that, can they leverage unilateral sanctions against Israel, and would that have a large enough effect to actually foment any kind of change?
Yeah, well, this is a complex question. I'll try to make it simple as much as I can, because BDS, the three letters, are at a very specific order. It's not random. It starts with boycott, it moves on to divestment, and then to sanctions. Boycott is a consumer boycott, something that all of us can do and should do. We should engage in boycott campaigns. If the campaigns are organized, coordinated, targeted, effective, then they create a momentum. And this momentum starts to put pressure on organizations such as churches and unions and universities and corporations, which can move on to the stage of divestment. Because as individuals, unless we're billionaires, we're probably not very big investors. It's more that the institutional bodies need to divest from Israeli companies and from international companies that profit from occupation, apartheid, and genocide. So, companies like Caterpillar so these divestment campaigns are the second stage. And when BDS was established 20 years ago, really 20 years ago, in 2005, it was that they said, well, sanctions will be the last step. When the movement becomes really strong enough, this is the stage in which governments will be the last to act, because we know how it works. Governments are slow and they will not do anything unpopular, and only when they see that the public is already taking action. This is exactly what happened with South Africa, that first there was a boycott, then divestment, and then government started to act and impose sanctions. So sanctions come last. And now we are seeing the sanctions already happening. So we are now at this stage. This has been a very difficult and intensive 20 years where Palestinians have organized these BDS campaigns and called on the world to act and support them. And this support has been slow to come, but it has come. It has come. There are now actually.
Which is good. I mean, justice can be delayed, but it will never be denied. As long as the sun rises in the morning, the Palestinians are going to get justice for the wrongs that happened to them. It might seem like a uphill battle. It might seem like something that cannot happen, that's going to be very difficult. But if you look at every struggle in history, it's always been tough. It's never been popular. It's never been easy. I mean, ending slavery wasn't easy. Ending Jim Crow wasn't easy. Ending apartheid in South Africa wasn't easy. People had to fight for it. People died to make those changes happen. So it's going to happen. Israel might seem invincible now. It's not invincible. There are cracks that are beginning to show, and it's good news. It's good news because the Palestinian people will get the justice that they deserve. So while this might seem like it's something that is slow, I'm happy that some action has been taken, and this action is going to put pressure on the Zionist appetite, Jewish supremacist, fascist state of Israel for it to stop its genocidal onslaught and ethnic cleansing campaign against the Palestinians, and which ultimately would be good for Israel itself. It would be in Israel's benefit. The only thing, the only thing that keeps this conflict going is Israel's desire to be a Jewish state, to be a Jewish supremacist state, because there is no reason why you cannot have one state that accommodates both Palestinians and Jews, Palestinian Arabs and Israeli Jews. There is really no reason why that cannot be. And then the other reason is that Israel's expansionist aims requires it to commit ethnic cleansing beyond its borders because it wants more land. It wants more land for Jewish people because it has this desire to ultimately bring back Jewish people from all over the world to the land of Israel. Those are the two things, those are the two major obstacles to peace. You might look at Palestinian look at Hamas and say terrorism. That's a tertiary. That's tertiary. If you are able to solve the root causes of this problem, then the problem of terrorism goes away. It goes away.
Actually, more BDS supporters around the world than there are Palestinians in the world. Something that is worth mentioning. Also, more than there are Israelis in the world, of course. But there are more Palestinians than Israelis, but maybe not all your listeners know this. And then divestment has already happened, at least in the tech sector in Israel, divestment has reached more than 90%. So they lost 90% of their investments. But this is still not enough. The sanctions are very important because sanctions are restricting the access of Israel to weapons. So every country that takes action in imposing sanctions on Israel, in restricting the transfer of weapons, not just the transfer, but also the sale and import of weapons. These are the three directions of the arms trade: import, export, and transiting. So every act of sanctioning saves human lives. We cannot underestimate the importance of this. And here, I do need to recognize Macron for actually taking some action and imposing some sanctions on Israel. This is much more important than recognizing the state of Palestine. He banned the Israeli arms companies from selling their wares at the France weapon fair, the Paris Air Show, and he stopped some of the arms shipments. There are some arms shipments that didn't stop. So and the difference between boycotts and sanctions is also the difference between the sanctions that we want governments to impose on Israel and the sanctions that you mentioned the US is imposing unilateral sanctions on whoever they want. The difference is that the sanctions on Israel are required by international law. They're not optional. There is a ruling of the International Court of Justice from July 19th of last year, which said this the occupation is illegal. Israel has 12 months to end it, and states have to impose, and corporations have to impose sanctions on Israel until it ends. So not many states are living up to this, but every state that does makes a very big impact. And just 2 weeks ago, there was the summit in Bogota, in Colombia, of 32 countries, and they came up with a list of 6 concrete steps, which are all about sanctions that states needs to adopt. Of the 32 states that participate in the summit, 12 signed it right away, said, we're going to implement it. The other 20 said, we don't have the authority. We need to go back to our governments and get it approved. And since that time, one country, Turkey, has decided, yes, we are going to approve it. We are going to impose the sanctions. So they're joining now.
Why did it take Turkey this long to take any action? Why?
Expect more countries to join, even beyond those 32 countries that participate in this particular summit.
And I'm curious with that, because we oftentimes hear in the US about how the United States is the largest supplier of weapons to Israel, which is, of course, true. We don't just hear it, it is, in fact, true. But so what does that mean in terms of, because the US is obviously not engaging in these sanctions against Israel, So what does that mean? Could you paint a picture for us? Because it seems it's not just about, okay, well, the US is selling weapons or Spain is selling weapons, or it's also the transport, right? And how they get there and things like that. So could you talk a little bit about that framework and why it's not just a loss if the US doesn't sign on to something like this?
It's absolutely not a loss. Of course, the US is the most complicit and has the biggest moral and legal obligation to stop sending weapons to Israel because they're the biggest violator. But in the reality that we live in, we don't expect the US administration to respect international law because they don't.
Yeah, because they think they are above international law, and especially when it comes to Israel, they're going to do anything to support Israel, whether or not Israel is flouting international law. So the US essentially set up this system and decides to ignore it in favor of Israel, in favor of itself, to carry out unilateral actions, to ignore the decisions of an international body that's supposed to arbitrate between nations. It's crazy.
And but this doesn't mean that we just need to despair and say, oh well, and all the other countries, because they're weaker and smaller, they should just give up. So just to clarify, Israel imports most of its weapons from the United States, but it doesn't rely solely on those weapons, and it is dependent on other components that the US is not able to provide. It is dependent on a lot of other countries for things that there is no substitute. So the tanks, every single tank that Israel is using has an engine that is made in Germany. If Germany stops the engines, the tanks don't go. So Germany has a responsibility, and Germany, unlike the United States,
So when is Germany going to learn from its mistake of always supporting, of always being at the terrible side of history? I mean, look at the Herero massacre in Africa that was Germany's doing. Look at the First World War that killed millions of people. Germany's doing. Second World War, Germany's doing, of which 6 million Jews were genocided by the fascist states of Germany. And now they are also supporting the Israelis to carry out a genocide in Palestine. So when is Germany ever going to learn that this is not a good thing for your reputation? You can't keep doing this. I mean, first time might have been a mistake, second time might have been a coincidence, the third time, that's a pattern.
does respect international law in every possible situation except when it comes to Israel. And we need to fix this exception. But yeah,
Yeah.
this is
Germany always makes an exception for genocide.
a major a major blind spot, but we will deal with it. And the biggest supplier of coal to Israel, and Israel depends on coal very much for producing electricity, is Colombia. And Colombia stopped the coal to Israel, causing an energy crisis in Israel.
Good one. Big up to Colombia.
This is very important because the energy that Israel is making from this coal is a dual-use item that is used to power Israel's war machine. It's not just for people's homes or for powering their uh, game stations at home or television sets. It is powering the mass server farms that run the AI algorithms that generate tens of thousands of targets in Gaza to eliminate the population. This is absolutely an essential part of Israel's killing machine. So Colombia made the right call, but it also made a call that is obligated by international law. So unfortunately, we live in a world where we need to acknowledge and respect and praise those governments who abide by their obligations rather than take it for granted. But let us praise the Colombian government for taking this very important decision, and courageous despite being obligatory. So this is important. But the other thing I wanted to say about the U.S. arms shipments to Israel is that the U.S. does not have a border with Israel. Something that just look at the map, and if you see how the Middle East is situated, especially with the Red Sea being blockaded by the Houthis in Yemen for weapon shipments to Israel, and the land direction to Israel from the east is countries that are not on good terms with Israel, like Iran. And then actually you see that there is only one way for the US to send weapons to Israel, and this is through European territory. And when Spain and Portugal said, well, we won't do this anymore because it's illegal, so we won't allow our ports and our airspace to be used to transit weapons to Israel, Trump threatened with sanctions against Spain and Portugal. And this, I think, had a very good result because the European Union, with countries that are very complicit in the genocide, like Germany, had no choice but to stand by its own members, right? And to stand against the US. So this put Germany in a very difficult position.
Yeah, so they found half of their balls.
Where they would
I hope they find the other one.
Eventually have to recognize that they can also not allow the US to use its territory to transit weapons to Israel. And maybe if you look at the map, it doesn't make a lot of sense why Germany would be a major station for the weapons from the US to Israel. But the reason is that there is a major NATO airbase in Germany. It's called Ramstein, where half of the base belongs to NATO and half belongs to Germany. And it is full of bombs, of exactly the kind of bombs that Israel is dropping on civilian homes in Gaza. So it makes a lot of logistical sense for the United States to transit all the bombs through this airbase and then send them to Israel, which is, I'm repeating myself, I know, but I do need to say it's illegal. So it has to stop.
Yeah, and that also just points out how NATO is just another arm of U.S. empire. So that's Germany's on the wrong side of every genocide. But
Yep. That is it. Perfectly summed. Well summed. Germany, always at the wrong side of every genocide. I hope they learn, but it doesn't seem they're going to be learning anytime soon. Anyway, that's the conversation today. It's heartbreaking that in this day and age, with the technology we have, with the world being a global village, with um, things happening in one part of the world being able to get to other parts of the world at the speed of light, to think that this sort of barbarity is still happening and is still allowed, is still supported by nations that are supposedly civilized. It's heartbreaking that this is happening. But like I said, nothing lasts forever, and even this wouldn't last forever. So thanks for coming to the show today. Like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you in another live stream. So it's bye for now. Thanks, Luke Bovine.